Now, another important topic of MEX 06, American literature. These assignment works are very important for you all to study 22-23 based on blocks 1 and 2. Course code is MEG 06 oblique 2022-23. Discuss the development of the revolutionary prose in America. Revolutionary prose was often polemical, written to encourage and even inspire the movement for political independence from England and to promote national unification. Thomas Paine championed an absolute break with England in his revolutionary tract Common Sense, 1776. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison contributed the majority of the essays, making up the Federalist Papers 1787-88, a collection setting forth much of the political theory underlying the US Constitution and advocating its ratification. Other major politically oriented prose authors of the period include Benjamin Franklin, who began to write the autobiography in 1771, and Thomas Jefferson, who authored the Declaration of an Independence 1776. By contrast, the first American novel, William Hill Brown's The Power of Sympathy 1789, was a sentimental epistolary novel supposedly based on the true story of a woman who was seduced by a brother-in-law, became pregnant as a result, and committed suicide after the birth of her illegitimate child. The historian David Ramsay has a matter of fact accorded utter centrality to American revolutionary prose in recounting the saga of the American Revolution. So, in establishing American independence, he observes, in the history of the American Revolution in 1789, the pen and the press had merit equal to that of the South. Ramsay's statements had at least two connotations. One, that the writings at historical events are as important in the representation of the events as the historical events themselves. The writings about the American Revolution being no exception to this rule. Two, that writing inspire events. Writing inspire events. This is absolutely true. Events as American started to express the revolution much before they enacted it. As Robert A. Ferguson has remarked, writing the thought inscribed the conception, which in turn blurs the line of distinction between thought and act. So, what we notice is the various ideas that are involved in this representation of fact. As Robert A. Ferguson has remarked, writing the thought describes the conception, which in time blurs the line of distinction between thought and act. Somewhere, a legitimate rhetoric of opposite grows into outrages and possibility of evolution. This opposition, it has been found in many places, opposition. And this grows into the outrageous possibility of revolution. A paradigmatic text in this context is Jeremiah Dummer's The Defense of the New England Charters 172-1. Dummer, British agent for Massachusetts and Connecticut and an American lawyer in London, rejects all thought of colonial revolt as ludicrous in a short digression on the subject, and yet the rebel leader John Adams could properly call this Panhelletic handbook. So, whatever way you name it, but there's no denial of the fact that such a handbook had created an uproar in the revolution. As Adams told William Tudor in 1818, the feeling of manners and principles which American prose produced the evolution appear in as vast abundance in this work as in any that I have read. How can we reconcile Drummond's and Adams' antithetical views about the defense of the New England charters? Drummer raises the idea of evolution only to dismiss it. In a defense of the New England charters, Dummer's worries repeatedly about the arbitrary power of the crown, the unnatural insult to colonial rights, and the oppression of royal governors, even as he laughs away any possibility of insurrection. The dangers he cites are indeed a cause of dismay. Oppression rushes like a tide and bears down everything before it. That is what he says. To the extent that British rule appears as a burden, literally as a yoke, it welcomes the thought of being torn off. Now, Benjamin Franklin, American Renaissance man. Jefferson was a brilliant political philosopher, architect, naturalist, agriculturist, and political leader. He dreamed of a Western empire for liberty, for America, and secured the Louisiana Purchase. A great deal has been made of the facility of colonial revolutionary writers in the 1760s and 1770s and of the convenient availability to them of an English oppositional rhetoric. Disgruntled Americans like John Dickinson, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson prove a literary match for the best intellects of the era in London. And their ability is one of the first things noticed by contemporary British readers. Even the most die-hard British interpreter could identify influences and analogies in arguments advanced by the colonials. The tyranny of subjugation, the democratic rights of any people or nation, the dangers of corruption in the constitution, and the emphasis upon public virtues. But these influences and analogies in themselves stress the enthusiasm rather than hesitation in protest. And it is the hesitations that define the evolution of colonial protest. Until 1776, the dominant Anglo-American perspective remains against the thought of rupture between America and England. If one document can explain the several hundreds American pamphlets on the crisis of politics in the emergent nations between 1764 and 1776, it would be John Adams' a dissertation on the canon and feudal law. Adam commences with the assumption that taken from the bishop and Bishop John Tillotstow that ignorance is the greatest cause of human misery, and concludes with the assertion that every source of knowledge be opened and set flowing. He's right in that respect. A dissertation on the canon and feudal law uses this structure to draw out a contrast between Adams' delineation of European ignorance and the American Enlightenment. In Europe, a nexus between the clerical and the feudal powers had kept the masses in the dark about their rights. And, of course, of their rights, that is true, until the Reformation, which incited the struggle for knowledge. So, struggle is everywhere. Adams' agenda is to seek the broadest possible popular publicity to this conspiracy, to enslave all America, as well as to warn all Americans that liberty cannot be preserved without a general knowledge among the people. Adam himself therefore fulfills a patriotic function in publishing his pamphlet in Boston's Gazette. He is participating in the self-proclaimed prescription that informed citizens should communicate their thoughts in writing to the general public. Meanwhile, to quote Robert A. Ferguson again, the tedium of repetition serves yet another purpose. The rhythms in pamphleteering gradually smooth the irregularities in revolutionary thought. American prose, the American pamphleteers, who reaches the largest audience in the world of the late 1760s, is John Dickinsonian letters from farmer in Pennsylvania. Only Thomas Patiley, Paile, in the next decade would have a more electric impact on colonial thought. Dickinson's 12 epistolary essays to my dear countrymen originally appeared in the Pennsylvania Chronicle. Other Chronicle newspaper reissued the essays as they were printed in the Chronicle between December 1767 and February 1768. Collected in a single pamphlet immediately after the last letter, they quickly went through 7 editions in the colonies and several in England. The most intensive and extensive pamphlet publication by any person during the period is relevant the to contemporaries is ensured by strategic appropriation of the cultural imperatives of its time. And of course, time and place. Intellectually, Dickinson uses the most sophisticated arguments to establish that Parliament cannot tax the colonies. His education at the London Inn of Court shows in the Pennsylvanian farmers frequent citation of British law and of writers such as Tacitus, Machiavelli, Locke, and Hume. These sources encourage him to assume that the social compact protects the inalienable right of property. Thus, any attempt to tax the property of an unrepresented citizen is contrary to English law. Emotionally, Dickinson is adept at the transition. This intellectual assumption translates into the celebrated cry of letter 7. We are taxed without our own consent has been clearly stated, expressed by ourselves, by our representatives. We are therefore slaves, and yet Dickinson never sacrifices his British readership to such rhetoric. With amazing dexterity in his purpose, he manages to keep all his different constituents under his spell. The Pennsylvania farmer always imposes substantial structural limitations on political opposition. The right kind of restraint is achieved through a strategy of breaks and controls. Dickinson begins by asking for a firm, modest exertion of a free spirit. Letter 11 balances protest over the township, acts dreadful strokes aimed at the liberty of those colonies against a modesty of temperament. It is said, I have waited some time in expectation of seeing the subject treated by a person much better qualified for the task. And the freedom of the writer's essential scene, so should not any honest man support his sentiments concerning freedom. Against the obligation of the writer to express himself or herself with responsibility. If the farmers seem to give it one hand while taking with the other, it is because he sees that the living whole is a free spirit cannot be simplified, especially in America. The problem of definition of the American identity is taken up pointedly in letter 111. Dickinson explained the difficulty of projecting terms of its complexity. It could be impossible to determine whether an American character is most distinguishable for his loyalty to his sovereignty, his duty to his mother country, his love of freedom, or his affection for her native soil, he said. So one pamphlet which forcefully depicts the new situation in Thomas Jefferson's A Summary View of the Rights of the British American 1774. A summary view of the rights of British America takes the almost unprecedented step of making the King of England the primary adversary. As long as the Parliament remains the main target of colonial protest, Americans can qualify the opposition to English colonization in the name of loyalty to King and Kingdom. For Parliament is not only multifaceted and multi-voiced and therefore hard to pin down, it also symbolizes institutional liberty. In an 18th century understanding of Anglo-American culture, Jefferson, for his part, does not absolve Parliament, but he also extends his critique to cover the most precarious of all tenures, His Majesty's will. As such, it appears to read sometimes as an official document, sometimes as a letter to the king, and sometimes as a political pamphlet. Jefferson and his comrades in arms selectively employ all three forms to drive their compatriots towards rebellion. So it is sometimes very this rebellious in its content, Rebellion outright is the message of the common sense. 1776 it has been mentioned. Even the ambiguitized and ambivalences of addresses is also taken care of. In a summary view of the rights of the British American, relatively inconspicuous though these are absent in the Thomas Paine's Tract. Thomas Paine's tract makes the pioneering open argument for independence in a language accessible to any literate persons. In his opinion, the disadvantages which are sustained by that connection are without number and set us at various nations who would otherwise seek our friendship. He builds slowly to an emotional pitch everything that is right or reasonable pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature calls, nature cries, it's time to part. Among the rash of pamphlets which appear in Americas between 1764 and 1776 debating the relationship with England, Common Sense is undoubtedly the preeminent, going to 25 editions in 1776 and selling hundreds of thousands of copies. Paine's pamphlets appeals to a wide range of American opinions anchored by England. Once the revolution is in progress, Spain specially cautious against mass action of lower class people, like those militia who in 1799 attacked the house of the Jarners of Wilson. Wilson was a leader who was absolutely against a subaltern empowerment through the revolution. It was 16, 17 minutes.